She was a wanted woman running from country to country, but finally she settled on Queensland's Sunshine Coast. And for once, she hoped she was safe. Then came the betrayal.
On a quiet Tuesday morning in November 2013, a 20-year-old nursing student answered a knock at the front door of her home on Australia's Sunshine Coast. Two officers from the Australian Federal Police stood outside and asked a question that made no sense to her. They wanted to know if she was Savannah Todd. She had never heard that name before. For her entire life, she had believed she was Samantha Gellenhuys, an Australian woman raised by a loving family, but within hours, she would learn that she had been born in South Carolina, taken from the United States when she was only 10 months old, and hidden under a new identity for nearly 2 decades. Back in America, a father had spent 19 years searching for the daughter he never stopped looking for. Investigators pursued leads across international borders. The FBI classified her mother as a federal fugitive. Television appeals, private investigators, and public pleas all failed to bring the little girl home. The most remarkable part of the story was not simply that she vanished. It was that she grew up without ever realizing she was the child everyone else had been searching for. Even more extraordinary, one of the longest-running international parental abduction cases in FBI history would not be solved by advanced surveillance, sophisticated intelligence, or a dramatic breakthrough in forensic science. Instead, the entire investigation would begin to unravel because of a single mistake that seemed almost insignificant at the time. How does a missing child unknowingly become an adult living an entirely different life? And how can someone disappear for 19 years while remaining hidden in plain sight? But before we dive deep into this story, please let us know where you are watching from. And if stories like this interest you, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. To understand how a 10-month-old American child could disappear for 19 years, it is necessary to begin long before the disappearance itself. The story starts in the coastal community of Isle of Palms, just outside Charleston, South Carolina. Known for its quiet neighborhoods and Atlantic shoreline, it was a place where family life and long-standing traditions shaped much of the community. It was here that Benjamin Harris Todd III, known simply as Harris, built his career as a successful stockbroker. He later married Dorothy Lee Barnett, a former flight attendant whose adventurous personality stood in contrast to Harris's more conventional lifestyle. They married in December 1991, hoping to build a family together. But according to later court records, the marriage deteriorated quickly. By the time their daughter, Savannah Catherine Todd, was born on May 6, 1993, the relationship was already breaking down. What followed became one of the longest child custody proceedings Charleston County had experienced at that time. Over 13 days, the court heard sharply conflicting testimony from psychiatric experts retained by both parents. Harris argued that Lee was emotionally unstable and should not have primary custody of their daughter. Lee disputed those claims, maintaining that she was a devoted mother and the appropriate caregiver for an infant who was still breastfeeding. After weighing the evidence, the judge awarded full custody to Harris Todd. The court concluded that Lee's documented psychological concerns, if left untreated, could negatively affect Savannah's future. Lee was granted supervised visitation every other weekend. Legally, the custody dispute appeared settled. In reality, it was only the beginning of a case that would cross 4 continents, involve forged identities, challenge international law enforcement for nearly 2 decades, and forever change the lives of everyone connected to one little girl. The custody ruling marked the legal end of one chapter, but for Dorothy Lee Barnett, it was not the end of the fight. According to later court records, she believed her daughter was not safe. Before the final visitation that would change everything, Lee recorded herself on videotape, explaining why she opposed the court's decision. She claimed she had seen bruises on Savannah's forehead and other injuries after visits with Harris. A neighbor who accompanied her during one exchange reportedly said they had also noticed those injuries. Harris denied the allegations. Doctors who examined Savannah found no medical evidence to support claims of abuse. Those conflicting accounts would remain part of the background of the custody dispute, but legally, the court's decision stood. Harris retained full custody, while Lee was granted supervised visitation. Then came the weekend that changed the course of dozens of lives. It was supposed to be another scheduled visit between a mother and her 10-month-old daughter. At its conclusion, Lee was expected to return Savannah to her father. She never did. Instead, mother and child vanished. For Harris Todd, the realization came with a silence that no parent ever expects. His daughter was gone, and no one could tell him where she had been taken. What initially appeared to be a custody violation quickly became something much larger. As the hours turned into days, it became clear that Lee had not simply failed to return the child. She had disappeared completely. Investigators soon learned that the disappearance had not been a spontaneous decision. It had been carefully prepared. Court records later showed that weeks before the visitation, Lee had already obtained a driver's license under the false name Alexandria Maria Canton. That fraudulent identification was then used to secure a passport in the same name. Before Savannah was even picked up for the scheduled visit, airline reservations had already been made. The escape route was waiting. On April 23, 1994, using the false identity she had created, Lee boarded a flight bound for Frankfurt, Germany. With her was 10-month-old Savannah, a child too young to understand that she was leaving behind the country where she had been born. From that moment forward, Savannah Catherine Todd effectively disappeared. She did not simply leave South Carolina. She disappeared from the life everyone expected her to have. The search initially focused on the possibility that Lee might still be somewhere in the United States, perhaps staying with friends or relatives. But investigators gradually realized that they were dealing with an international parental abduction. The child was already overseas, and every passing hour made recovery more difficult. For Harris, there were almost no answers, only questions. Where had they gone? Who was helping them? Would he ever see his daughter again? Those questions would define the next 19 years of his life. Meanwhile, Savannah was entering a future she would never remember choosing. She was too young to know that she had crossed an ocean under a false identity, too young to remember her birth name, too young to recognize that the life ahead of her would be built on documents that did not belong to her. The investigation had only just begun, but the child at the center of it was already far beyond the reach of everyone searching for her. Once authorities confirmed that Savannah had been taken out of the United States, the investigation expanded dramatically. The case moved beyond a custody dispute and into the jurisdiction of federal law enforcement. Dorothy Lee Barnett was charged with international parental kidnapping and passport fraud. The FBI classified her as a federal fugitive, and the search for Savannah became an international effort. Friends and relatives were questioned. Associates were interviewed. Anyone believed to have assisted Lee before or after the disappearance came under scrutiny. Harris Todd also pursued civil litigation, deposed individuals he believed had knowledge of the escape, and continued searching through every legal avenue available. The public search became impossible to ignore. Harris appeared on national television programs including Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted, hoping someone might recognize his daughter's face. He distributed missing child flyers, offered a reward for information, hired private investigators, and even recorded video messages addressed to Savannah, messages intended for a daughter who had no idea they existed. Year after year, the appeals continued. Year after year, they produced no answers. As birthdays passed, the investigation grew colder. The FBI maintained its pursuit, but no confirmed sightings brought them closer to the missing child. The international trail appeared to vanish almost as soon as it began. What the police could not see was the remarkable extent of Lee's reinvention. After leaving Germany, she continued moving from country to country. France, Malaysia, Singapore. Each move placed additional distance between Savannah and the people searching for her. Eventually, while living in South Africa, Lee met an engineering geologist named Juan Gellenhuys. According to later accounts, she told him about her past, including the outstanding FBI warrant. The two married, and Lee legally adopted her husband's surname. At the same time, Savannah's identity changed once again. She was no longer Savannah Todd. She became Samantha Gellenhuys. Juan embraced the role of father, and Samantha grew up believing he had always been exactly that. As the years passed, the family welcomed another child, moved to Botswana, later to New Zealand, and finally settled on Australia's Sunshine Coast. By then, almost every trace connecting Samantha to the missing infant from South Carolina had disappeared. She attended school, made lifelong friends, learned to dance, played piano, loved animals, eventually enrolled in nursing at university. To everyone around her, including Samantha herself, she was simply another young Australian building an ordinary future. That ordinary life created one of the greatest ironies in the entire investigation. While the FBI searched internationally for a missing child, that child was growing into adulthood without any memory of the country searching for her. On the opposite side of the world, Harris Todd lived a completely different reality. His search never truly stopped. Every birthday marked another year without his daughter. Every failed lead meant beginning again. The investigation had reached a point where it seemed entirely possible that Savannah Todd might never be found. Yet the truth was astonishingly close. After 19 years of carefully maintaining false identities across 4 continents, everything that had kept the case hidden would begin to unravel. Not because investigators uncovered a sophisticated criminal network or discovered overlooked forensic evidence, but because of a single word spoken at exactly the wrong moment. At some point while living in Australia, Lee reportedly addressed her daughter by her birth name, Savannah, in front of someone who knew her only as Samantha. It lasted only a moment, but it was enough. The unusual name caught the friend's attention. Why had Samantha suddenly been called Savannah? The inconsistency lingered, and over time that small detail became difficult to ignore. The friend began looking more closely at the family's history. Eventually, that suspicion reached Harris Todd. The information was surprisingly specific. A woman known as Alexandra Gellenhuys was living on Australia's Sunshine Coast with a young woman whose background seemed difficult to explain. Soon afterward, an Australian couple independently contacted Harris, saying they had known the family for years under those names. They even provided a photograph. When Harris saw the image, he immediately recognized Dorothy Lee Barnett. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, investigators had something concrete. Law enforcement agencies in Australia coordinated with authorities in the United States. Once identities were confirmed, events moved quickly. On the morning of November 4, 2013, officers arrived at Lee's home in Queensland with an arrest warrant. The long search was over, but the greatest revelation was still waiting for the person at the center of the case. Samantha was not at home when her mother was arrested. Instead, she received an unexpected telephone call from Lee, who explained that she had once been married in the United States and was being taken into custody because she had been accused of kidnapping her. The statement was almost impossible to understand. The following day, Samantha met with FBI agents. During that conversation, the foundation of her entire identity changed. She learned that she had been born in South Carolina on May 6, 1993, as Savannah Catherine Todd. She learned about the custody battle, the court order, the supervised visitation that ended in disappearance, the forged passport, the years spent on the FBI's wanted list, and a biological father who had searched for her for nearly 20 years. She later recalled that this was also the moment she learned her own date of birth. Everything she believed about herself, her name, her nationality, her family history, and even who her father was, had been rewritten in a single conversation. The mystery that investigators had spent 19 years trying to solve was finally resolved. For Samantha, however, an entirely different journey was only beginning. Following her arrest, Dorothy Lee Barnett was extradited from Australia to the United States to face federal charges. She was prosecuted for international parental kidnapping and for making false statements on a United States passport application. Ultimately, Lee pleaded guilty. The court sentenced her to 21 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. Because she received credit for time already served after her arrest, her remaining imprisonment was significantly shorter than many observers expected. The sentence immediately generated public debate. Many believed that a child taken across 4 continents and hidden for 19 years deserved a much harsher legal consequence. Others pointed out that parental abduction cases often differ from stranger abductions because of the complicated family relationships involved. Whatever opinions surrounded the sentence, one fact remained unchanged. A father had lost 19 years with his daughter. The legal proceedings also marked the beginning of another complicated chapter. Rather than immediately embracing the father who had searched for her for so long, Samantha stood beside the woman who had raised her. From her perspective, Dorothy Lee Barnett was the mother she had always known. She publicly questioned allegations made during the custody dispute and sought to understand every aspect of the case before forming a relationship with Harris Todd. She later wrote Harris an 8-page letter asking him to address the claims that had surrounded the custody battle years earlier. There was no dramatic reunion, no instant resolution. Instead, both father and daughter approached the relationship carefully. Samantha traveled to the United States during the legal proceedings and reunited with members of her maternal family. In 2015, she finally met Harris Todd in person after making clear that she wanted a relationship built without hostility or demands to choose between her parents. For his part, Harris did not ask her to take sides. His focus remained on building whatever relationship was possible after nearly 2 decades apart. Samantha also chose to keep the name she had grown up with. Although she had been born Savannah Catherine Todd, she continued to live as Samantha Gellenhuys, the identity that had shaped almost every memory of her life. The criminal case had reached its conclusion. The emotional consequences had not. Those would continue long after the courtroom was empty.